Hello and welcome to Rogue Artisans and Crafters, winner of the 2018 Southern Oregon Television Awards for Best Arts and Culture Show. I'm your host, Glamour Dave Nienow. We welcome you, our viewer, to our show where we typically feature local artists and craftspeople here in Southern Oregon. And we would talk to our featured artists about how they came to their art, what drives them as artists, find out stories behind their art process, and how their work as artists influences their lives. But today we're doing something a bit different with today's show episodes. Today we're going to be talking about different aspects of the role of art as a healing tool in today's culture and society. And in that regard, with this episode, we have the privilege of having our guest, certified therapist, Delaine Due. I discovered Delaine Due a while back when I came across one of her local ads in the Medford Sneak Preview publication. I made note of her profession and work and thought that there was a unique art story to tell here. And today we will be talking with Delaine Due about the use of art as a therapy tool to help improve people's lives. We will discuss the full range of what constitutes art therapy and how the process works. And so today we will talk to Delaine Due about her life as a certified art therapist and her professional work in that arena. And so we welcome Delaine to our show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
So to begin with, what attracted you to this arena of therapy?
Pretty good story. I was in art school, a private art school, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
It's, as a student, we had a saying, if we could do this, we could do anything.
Yeah.
So lots and lots and lots of hours poured into lots and lots of homework, all of it in the form of art in some way, and then critiqued, constantly critiqued. And that's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah.
And I took my first art therapy class as an undergrad in that program and thought, aha, this is the kind of art that I want to be doing, because I could rip it up, I could make it ugly, I could refuse to do it, and I still wasn't going to get critiqued and graded poorly.
Yeah, right.
So I could be as rebellious as I wanted, and I was still going to come out okay.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts from a school in the Midwest that at the time had an art therapy minor program. So I signed right up and followed the path from there.
Yeah, okay. And so how long have you been down this path, so to speak?
So, well, I guess then since I was 20-ish,
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah.
So I took a break. I did my master's work in psychology and art therapy at Sonoma State University in Northern California. And graduated there in 1999 and moved here to Southern Oregon shortly after. So my entire professional career has been here in Southern Oregon as an art therapist.
Yeah, all right. And so beyond the initial training education, what's the process that makes you a certified art therapist?
That's a great question. So art therapists need to have a master's level education in psychology and art therapy or counseling and art therapy. And we're trained in all of the counseling and psychology techniques that are verbal, as well as the pieces that are needed to be an art therapist. And then once an art therapist graduates from a certified program, they do their postgraduate internship hours, which are supervised by another qualified art therapist. And so that lasts a couple years typically to accumulate those hours and that supervision. And then the art therapist can sit for, they can register as a registered art therapist with the American Art Therapy Association. And once they have that registration, then they can sit for the board certification exam.
Right,
So that's the whole process to become an ATRBC.
Okay. That's a long set of letters
That's
to have after your name.
a long set of letters, yes. And then the counseling license on top of it adds more letters. So
Yeah,
it's long.
yeah, okay. Well, in terms of understanding how art as a therapy tool is, I mean, how does one determine that there's like an emotional contingent to a piece of art that you study to kind of help someone along? I mean, what's that process like?
What's the process like, right? So when people call for therapy services, I get the question a lot like, well, what happens in a session? You know, what does that look like? So It depends a lot on the person that's being seen, the person that's there for therapy, or the group that's happening, and the setting and the population. So art therapists work with any population, all ages, in institutions, in schools, in private practice. And when somebody is participating in art therapy, especially in private practice, in private sessions, usually the person comes in and will talk a little bit about what's going on for them that week. What is it that they want to focus on in that session, just like you would in a verbal type therapy session.
Okay.
And then typically the art therapist will suggest out of that, kind of try and pick out the golden nuggets in what they've explained as their experience, and suggest making some imagery about one of those things to gather some more information about that experience. So if somebody highlights that they just, something happened and they just got really angry and they were surprised by that, for example, then that might lead to an image of, well, what do you think that anger looks like in particular? And so they may spend, 10 or 15 minutes on an image with a variety of medium. There's usually a variety of medium available to someone. And then the therapist and the client get to see what that looks like in a really tangible form, which is one of the nice things about art therapy, is that it's first person present tense explanation of a human experience that's often difficult to put into words.
Right, yeah.
And then we can look at the same thing. We can look at the same personal thing and we can both see that it's red, or we can both see how big it is or how much space on the paper it takes up, or if it's really tiny and like surprisingly maybe just over in the corner, those sorts of things. And then the therapist will help the person explore the image some more, be kind of curious about what it looks like and what the person sees, and maybe offer something else that the therapist sees. And sometimes that will lead to another image, or it might lead to changing the first image. So art therapy is a good place to practice different outcomes, because it's art materials.
Yeah, right,
so it's ultimately, it's a pretty strong container and it's really safe. So, I can make an image that, tries this way of dealing with a conflict and see what I think the outcome of that will be. And I can also try it this way, but because it's my personal imagery, it's really safe.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, a client is creating a piece of art, and it's the whatever that imagery is. I mean, there's perceived symbolism, either in the figure or in the color chosen. I mean, I would imagine the aspect of color has an effect and has a role in determining an interpretation. I mean, I would imagine like red tends to probably be associated with, anger kinds of hot kinds of issues, versus cold colors like blue being an indicator of something. Or am I totally off base?
No, you're not totally off base. So color means a lot, and the absence of color can also mean something. And the used word interpretation, which is a great thing to talk about. So one of the things that art therapists don't do is just look at an image and be able to tell you all about your life and how crazy you are, kind of thing. That's not how it works.
Yeah, okay.
So the person who made the image always gets the opportunity to speak to the image first. And to say what they see, because they're the person that made the image.
Right.
So that's really important. And then it's also really important, there's phrases like image abuse or interpretation abuse in the field of art therapy, to not let myself run away with all kinds of interpretations of symbols and colors, because it's a very personal piece, it's a very personal image.
Right.
And there may be layers of truth, like there may be a little bit of truth in what you see in the image and what I see in the image and what the person who made sees in the image. So there may be a little bit of difference. It may be providing a new perspective for the person who made the image, or it may just be flat out like, nope, that's not it. I don't resonate with that at all. So like color, I've had in groups, I have had people, make an image that for them is ugly. And so maybe it, it has whatever colors to them represent something ugly because that fits their experience that they want to express.
Right.
And then somebody else in the group says, "Oh, it's so beautiful."
Yeah, right.
And they're like, "No, it's not beautiful." So, so that it's very personal. So there's
Yeah.
no cookbook of,
Right.
you know, like red equals definitely this.
Yeah.
Although I liked how you said hot and cold,
Uh-huh.
because generally colors are very evocative of
Yes.
something.
Right.
And so that's definitely true, that looking at somebody's piece, like imagine if you were in the image, what would it be like? That's a good imaginal, you know,
Yeah.
therapeutic question. And if I was in an image that had a lot of red in it, I might feel really warm and hot, or like I want to get out of here.
Yeah.
But depending on the reds, I might feel just toasty and perfectly happy, you know. And the same thing with cool tones. I might feel really freezing and want to get out of here, or I might feel like, oh, this is so soothing, and I
Yeah,
just needed
right.
this nice cool breeze, you know, kind of
yeah.
thing. So it's very personal. And there are also, you know, part of the training to be an art therapist is to be able to look at images with a clinical eye and be able to discern some of those things and be curious and see if things are matching or not matching. Sometimes that's it. Like if I'm looking at a piece and I'm feeling very cold, and I wouldn't want to be in there, and the person who made it says that it's a wonderful day and they're just having a great time and it couldn't be better, you know, then I know, like, you know, I wonder what's going on, you know, because my sense of that image is so different than what they're telling me.
Right.
So sometimes, I don't know,
Yeah.
hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, in a way. So in a way, I mean, you know, the client is creating the art piece, and you mentioned about they're talking to the piece, kind of. So I'm in my mind, I'm imagining that after the piece is created, and you're interacting with the client, that you're getting their feedback. You're kind of listening to they're talking about how that piece feels to them.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're telling what they see.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a way, the client's also kind of also defining a boundary of how that feeling is, right? That you're then interpreting as the therapist.
Yeah, so I can ask them more about that, or sometimes they might talk about all the pieces in the image and kind of give me a tour. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll say, you know, give me a tour of what you see here. And so maybe they talk about all the pieces of the image, but they don't talk about one part, like that one yellow blob
Yeah,
over there,
right, yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so then that's where I come in and might say, you know, so I hear about this part, this part, this part, this part, and this part, and you know, I'm curious about this yellow part over here.
Yeah.
Because psychologically, what's left out in the
Is-
description is sometimes important.
Yeah.
And they may not have realized that they left that part out because they're in the hot seat at that point.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have some images that you brought.
We do, and this might help
Yeah.
talk about what you're asking.
So if the control room could start to bring up these images, and we'll kind of talk about what they all represent.
Yeah, so this one and the next two are from my own history with expressive art, and because you asked about school and
Yes,
how I
right.
came upon this. So
Yeah.
these are definitely images that, you know, I could do without worrying about getting a bad grade. And these are from my sketchbook from years and years and years ago, like 25 years ago now maybe. So I have my own experiences with 2 or 3 bouts of some pretty severe PTSD in my life.
Okay.
And so these images are reflective of that. So this is a nightmare image.
All right.
And then a few months later, I did the next image in my sketchbook. That should be there, yeah. And this was, I was very angry when I did this image, and also sad, which I think comes through. Most people looking at this image probably get the sad part, maybe.
Yeah.
And I still wasn't quite conscious of exactly the connection between the 2 images. It was definitely months between the 2. And then at some point I got it. I think I was just looking back through images. And this is a good example of how art therapy can record a moment in time
Right.
and how somebody's feeling,
Yeah.
and then create this record that can be reviewed and reflected and maybe expanded upon. And so the next image was my expansion, because what I got was that was my second grade self in the nightmare image and then in the image where I was sad and angry. And so I consciously decided to make this image of my second grade self and see if I could make see myself as a little more realistic and a little more grounded. And so that's a little triptych that it kind of explains that longevity sometimes of having a body of work to look at. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to the next.
Next one. Okay, so the next three are highlighting stick figures. So one of the things you and I talked about before was who can do art therapy as a client. And a lot of, some of the groups that I run, folks really like to let new people know that stick figures are awesome and we like them. They can do anything. So you don't have to have art skill to participate in art therapy. So this one and the next two are stick figures, which can be very expressive. And they really can do anything from feeling lonely to being a hero to being really angry. Yeah. And then let's see what's next. So some of the work that People's Art does now in the community is working with cancer survivors. So these next four images are from one, and this might help explain what happens in a session a little bit. So the person who made this image came in and was really recalling having a panic attack. Her job, hearing that somebody else had gotten a cancer diagnosis. So actually, so that first one, the one before this one, the figure is laying on the ground, and that big giant thing is on top and even through the whole body. And so that was the panic attack. That was the feeling of the panic attack. So I asked them to make an image of what the panic looked like, and this was the image. And then I asked them to cut that big rock open and see what it was made of inside. So panic is a really big thing. So getting more information about it is helpful. What's it actually made out of? So it was made out of these layers. I can't remember what they were, but it's made out of these layers. And so then we worked with some cognitive processes to manage and regulate those layers of anger and panic. And then they were able to make the next image, which is having a really different perspective. So now that they've regulated that panic and that anger and fear, and now the figure is standing up and looking out. And so that's the change. And then they took it from there and they were just inspired to keep going. So then they made another image in the series. There we go, the butterfly, and sort of reframed their cancer experience and that they were coming out of it and into a sense of freedom. And so the first three of those images were done in one session, just very quickly. And then this one was done later on their own. Kind of. So that's an example of what happens sometimes.
Okay, so let's go on to the next.
And this is just it's one of my favorite images. I just think it's, I see a lot of beauty in it and a lot of expression. This was one cancer survivor's expression of what radiation treatment looks like. So in that way, it's hard to explain that in words to people, but seeing an image of it is really powerful. So that's that image.
Okay, let's go on to the next.
And then I have a couple in here from working with veterans. This is what hypervigilance looks like, which is a symptom that's part of PTSD experience. And it's a mask.
Okay, let's go on to the next.
And then this one, also a veteran. And in this, I see that, that difficult transition from military back to civilian life is in there, but also the intrusive thoughts of PTSD again. And so the Barbie doll legs painted and put into the mask is their idea of how they think of those intrusive thoughts as jumping into their brain. So that's that one. And then this is from an adolescent, from a young adult that I worked with in the prison system. And this is a good example of how art therapy can provide a safe container for really explosive, intense emotion. So this guy was usually well put together, but the day he came into group, this day he was fuming, like Pigpen. You could could see the fumes hanging out. So I just told him to let the paper have it. And this is what he made. And there's chunks of oil crayon actually pushed into that paper. So he spent a few minutes doing that, and then he all of a sudden sat up, and I went over to him and we just kind of said, yep, there it is. That's what it looks like. Okay,
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah.
Looks, I think I'd be angry if that happened to me too, And then I just asked him what was next. So we didn't really talk about this one that much. The art did its work, on its own.
Yeah.
So I asked him what was next, and I gave him a new piece of paper, and then he did this next one, which I think is our last example. So he was able to use the art therapy process with my support to reorganize. And so he organized, he brought in different colors, and he was able to then make decisions because he could see that there were different things he could do instead of just staying stuck and being so angry.
Mm-hmm.
So he was able to feel that and then shift to being able to think about it. So that's what he did. Better he go back out onto the unit looking like that than the first one.
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting to see how the variety of artistic expression that is created through this process. It's, in my life, I mean, I've done lots of art throughout my life in various forms. But I've also have had to deal with depression over in recent years because of dealing with my father, caring for him and stuff. But at the same time, I've never had, never brought my art skills in to deal with the emotional issues that have confronted my life. So when I came across your ad a few months ago and thought, oh, well, this is really interesting, because for one, I never even thought that there was such an arena, and so that's why you're here, because it was like discovering that there was this form of therapy out there. I thought, oh, well, this is something that I think a lot of people could make use of, and I know at certain points in my life in recent years, I probably could have used it myself, So I thank you very much for coming on to be able to talk about this.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for helping me and People's Art do a little outreach and help educate folks.
So on a lighter side note, in this arena, I'm just curious, when you go into a museum to view art, when you see a Picasso, what's your? Is your training? It's like you look at Picasso and think that guy has problems, or is it just like, or you just seeing the art?
I could just appreciate the art in a museum. Sometimes I think I'm more. My filter, maybe my protective filter for being affected by the image, is a little thinner because I that's what I do all day, is let myself be affected by images.
Right.
More so like the little kid drawings in the bank window, that I can't look at.
Well, this is kind of probably the most serious show discussion that I've had since creating the show.
Art therapy deals with people's pain, so
But in getting close to ending the show, I had to lighten it up a little bit. So I had to get that question out there about your view of professional artists. So is there any last thing that you want to tell the audience before we kind of wrap things up?
I forgot to say when we started looking at the slides, I wanted just to say, and you kind of bring it up with the museum question, is that looking at images of people's personal art is really different than looking at professional or fine art. And so looking at the images with the eye, like we discussed, like what if I had made that image, what would that feel like? Or I wonder what it'd be like to be that figure in that image, versus a critical eye of balance and form and line and texture and all of that kind of stuff that I learned in art school, So that's what I would say, is looking at personal imagery is a tender experience, and to give people some space, even if it's your little kid who brought something home from school. Just let it be okay.
Okay. Well, where are we at on the show here? Are we getting close to, is there? Oh, okay, yeah. So we are near the end of our show. So I want to thank you, Delaine, for coming on and talking about about this, what you do, and its role to help people. So I thank you very much for coming on to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
So we have reached the end of our show, Rogue Artisans and Crafters, and we want to thank you at home for joining us and learning about our guest, certified art therapist Delaine Due. We wish to thank Delaine Due for agreeing to come onto the show to discuss her life and work as an art therapist. I encourage you, the viewer, to visit Delaine's official site to learn more about her work and services. We also want to thank our crew who have made it possible to put this program together, and to thank RVTV for their wonderful studio facility, which allows us to produce shows such as this one. If you would like to become a studio producer and create your own public access show, you can contact RVTV to learn how. You can watch the show on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. and Thursday evenings at 11:30 p.m. on Channel 15 of the Ashland Home Network, and in the rest of Southern Oregon via Charter Cable on Channel 182. You can also find all episodes of Rogue Artisans and Crafters at archive.org. You can also visit RVTV online at rvtv.sou.edu to find live streaming of all RVTV shows. You can also follow our show on Facebook by visiting and liking our official show page, and just search for Rogue Artisans and Crafters. So I'm your host, David Glamour Dave Nienow, and we will see you next time. And there's breaking glass for breaking the fourth wall.
Okay, awesome.